Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Devils by Fyodor Dostoevsky. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of Devils with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Devils, also translated as demons or possessed, is one of the four major novels by the great Fyodor Dostoevsky. It is his penultimate work, and it was followed by the brothers Karamazov. Dostoevsky was a giant of world literature and left a remarkable body of works. His writings influenced many people, including many famous 20th century figures such as Sigmund Freud, Einstein, and the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. Also many writers, Hemingway, James Joyce, Franz Kafka, and others. I think Dostoevsky's literary impact can only be rivaled by his compatriot Leo Tolstoy. Dostoevsky is considered a great psychologist and Tolstoy more of a sociologist, but the themes they explored overlapped. They dealt with the social conditions of the 19th century Russia, which were responsible for the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. I would also say that Dostoevsky was more of a Slavophile, less critical of the Russian ruling class. He focused more on the individual and his sins. I think it was the result of some traumas he went through in his youth. A mock execution and 5 years in exile in Siberia seems to have made him more careful in expressing his political views. Maybe as he matured, he saw how foolish were his earlier revolutionary ideas and where they were leading the Russian society. What is Devils about? The novel is ridiculing the Western progressive ideas entering Russia in the 19th century, somewhat making a caricature of them, and there is the description, not so favorable, of the people who acquired those ideas in Western Europe, even America, and were trying to implement them into the Russian society. It is the struggle between the traditional, conservative, religious Russia and the new, young, atheistic and liberal generation. Also, there is the idea that each one needs to decide for himself what he believes in, and in the novel, it is the struggle between believing and not believing in God's existence. God is necessary and therefore must exist, but I know that he does not and cannot exist. Don't you understand that a man with those two thoughts cannot go on living? So each one must decide for himself whether God exists, and this implies each one is in control of how he feels, making circumstances somewhat irrelevant. Man is unhappy because he doesn't know he is happy, only because of that. It's everything, everything. Whoever learns will at once immediately become happy, the same moment. A bit of the plot. The book is narrated by a somewhat ambiguous individual, maybe Dostoevsky's alter ego, and it is divided into three parts. In part one of the protagonists, Stepan Verkhoviensky, an aging intellectual, is living freeloading at his friend Varvara Stavrogina's estate. Varvara has a son, Nikolai, who is a kind of man-about-town type, causing problems by somewhat indiscriminately seducing women. His victims are a wealthy family friend, Lisa, Varvara's adopted daughter, Dasha, and while drunk, he seemed to have married a semi-retarded girl, Maria. Varvara tries to amend the crisis by having Stepan marry Dasha and getting him off her back, but out of nowhere, Stepan's estranged son, Piotr, appears. He has been abandoned by his father and because of it harbors a lot of resentments, and he discloses that his father is not happy about the arrangement. There is another individual present, Shatov, who without any provocation punches Nikolai in the face. Later it comes to light that Nikolai also seduced Shatov's wife and left her pregnant. In part 2, Piotr, who came from Switzerland, seems to be on some kind of radical revolutionary mission. wants to recruit Nikolai, but Nikolai is not interested. Nikolai meets another individual, Kirillov, whose life goal is to eventually commit suicide. Nikolai also talks to Shatov. Apparently there are no hard feelings after being punched. He probably considered it earned. Shatov is a member of Pyotr's revolutionary cell, but wants out, and Nikolai suspects Pyotr might want to kill him to keep him from disclosing their activities. Meanwhile, Pyotr is building his social context, focusing on the governor's wife, Julia, and also agitating the local population. He is also aware of Kirillov's plan to commit suicide and wants to take advantage of it to benefit his activities. In part 3, Julia, motivated by Pyotr, organizes a party where different members of society show up. The party turns into chaos when individuals with different political ideas clash. Also, a fire breaks out and destroys part of the town, further annoying and agitating the local population, and scapegoats are found and sacrificed. Stefan, seeing all the commotion, decides to leave to search for a brighter future elsewhere. Nikolai's sins catch up with him, and he decides it is time to pay for them. And Pyotr settles his score with Shatov, takes advantage of Kirillov's willingness to die, and disappears. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Devils? It is a long and at times confusing read. There are many characters, and to make it more difficult, Dostoevsky flips between using their first and last names, but as the book progresses, the pieces slowly start to fall in place, and it becomes a bit more visible what is it Dostoevsky is saying, and where he might be heading. It is similar to life, which can be pretty confusing, but as the time passes, we do get some understanding of it, of what is going on. The novel is not so much plot-driven, but rather the description of different ideas and thoughts present in the 19th century Russian society, the people who subscribe to them and how they relate with each other, and the impact this has on the society. So I will talk about the main characters somewhat in order of appearance, since it is difficult to establish their importance in relation to the plot. Well, they all are important, but to what degree is rather vague. The responsible for the inception of the drama is Stepan, by bringing the ideas from the West and teaching them to the young people he came in contact with. He infected them with ideas that set their lives on a destructive trajectory. This relates to the different titles given the novel in English translations. There is discussion which one is more correct or correct. The literal translation of the title, Piesy, is demons, which probably refers to the ideas. When the title possessed is used, it refers to the main characters being possessed by the ideas, and devils are the ideas and also the characters believing in them. Maybe for the author, demons and devils were ideas, and even God, the good, is nothing more than an idea, so ideas are paramount for life. But let me tell you, without the English, life is still possible for humanity. Without Germany, life is possible. Without the Russians, it is only too possible. Without science, without bread, life is possible. Only without beauty, it is impossible. So Stepan is an older intellectual, influenced by Western liberal ideas, and he tries to pass that influence on to the young, serving as a tutor to a few of them when they were children. He freely interjects French into his conversation, probably to show his intellectual superiority and to stay relevant by showing he's in sync with the new and young, since his heyday seemed to be long gone. He is living thanks to the generosity of others, Varvara, and to restart his dying or dead career, he plans on writing a book, but he doesn't have the energy anymore that would be needed to accomplish it. So what keeps him going is just the idea. Stepan is guilty of spreading the political and social ideas criticized by Dostoevsky in the book. He is perplexed by Turgenev's novel, Fathers and Sons, and says, I don't understand Turgenev. That Bazarov of his is a fictitious figure. It does not exist anywhere. The fellows themselves were the first to disown him as unlike anyone. In the novel, Fathers and Sons, Turgenev identified new ideologies forming inside the Russian society, the Russian nihilism, the product of Western influence over Russia, over the new generation, the radical progressive ideas that materialized during the French Revolution were somewhat tamed in the West, but found a new home in Russia. I think Turgenev, who spent most of his adult life outside of Russia, didn't think the country was ready for the Western liberalism. Further, when the narrator visits Stepan, he notices a book on the table, titled What's to be Done? Oh, how the book tortured him. He sometimes flung it aside in despair and, leaping up, paced about the room almost in a frenzy. I agree that the author's fundamental idea is a true one, he said to me feverishly, but that only makes it more awful. It's just our idea, exactly ours. Were these the conclusions we were striving for? Who can understand the original idea in this? The book was written as somewhat of an answer to the unasked but implied questions in Fathers and Sons. It was read and admired by Lenin, and its ideas were the motivator for the Bolshevik Revolution of the 1917 and responsible for the formation of the utopian socialist state. The book was written a few years before Devils, and in this novel, Dostoevsky rebuttals the ideas presented in it. He tries to show how dangerous, even ridiculous, they are, and where this new ideology might be taking Russian society. God is the synthetic personality of the whole people, taken from its beginning to its end. It has never happened that all, or even many, peoples have had one common God, but each one has always had its own. It is a sign of the decay of nations when they began to have gods in common. When gods began to be common to several nations, the gods are dying and they fade in them together with the nations themselves. The stronger a people, the more individual their God. There never has been a nation without a religion, that is, without an idea of good and evil. Every people has its own conception of good and evil, and its own good and evil. When the same conception of good and evil becomes prevalent in several nations, then these nations are dying, and then the very distinction between good and evil is beginning to disappear. Reason has never had the power to define good and evil, or even to distinguish between good and evil, even approximately. On the contrary, it has always mixed them up in a disgraceful and pitiful way. The idea that one size fits all is the cornerstone of the leftist ideology that aims for global revolution to unite all people under the same rules and ruler, same ideological religion. It is kind of ironic that China, which is supposed to be the great bastion of communism, at least in theory, totally rejects the idea of global democracy, insisting that each people need to create their own democracy based on their unique circumstances. Dostoevsky's warning was taken further by Nietzsche when he said, "God is dead because we killed him." Stepan is shown to be not only a parasite living of others, Varvara, but also a coward. After seeing what his ideas can do to a society, he tries to run away, but in the end he recognizes the failures of his self-centered ideology when he says, "I have been telling lies all my life, even when telling truth. It was not for truth's sake, but my own." And he says, more important than man's own happiness is knowing there is a place where every man can be happy. He says he would like to live his life again and would like to see all the younger characters again, Peter, Shatov, etc., because he recognizes he did it all wrong and would do it differently next time around. These are regrets of a dying man finally seeing the truth, which is there is no such thing as general truth. Varvara, Stepan's benefactor, is also aging, and like he wants to stay relevant, she plans to start a political or ideological magazine, but it seems just a pipe dream. On the other hand, unlike Stepan, she is wealthy, and this allows her to control people around her, and this makes her seemingly more relevant. In the end, I think she might be there to symbolize Russian traditional woman, religious, somewhat conservative and practical, but confused by seeing all the changes around her. I think in general she is portrayed as a pretty decent human being, preoccupied with and trying to take care of people around her. Even though her mannerisms might seem harsh, but this was the reality of life in the 19th century Russia. They both are examples of fathers, as in being responsible for whom the children, Pyotr and Nikolai, become by educating or choosing the educator and ideas the children are exposed to, and also installing a value system in them. So Dostoevsky is implying that the decline is a progressive process passed from one generation to the next. And the specific culprit in the novel is Stepan, because he was the early influence on the younger characters. While Nikolai seems to be more of the product of his mother, Varvara, he's a Russian playboy, preoccupied with himself, his adventures, and well-being. You're an atheist because you're a snob of the snobs. You've lost the distinction between good and evil because you have lost touch with your own people. But as his transgressions pile up, Nikolai arrives at his existential crisis. He starts to wonder about justice, even God, and feels he deserves to be punished. He feels guilty of his wife's death, even though he didn't kill her, but he wonders how much and in what ways he did encourage it, even if, to a certain extent, he couldn't be considered an accomplice. The crucial event that shows the level of Nikolai's perversion and selfishness is in the chapter often missed in the older translations. It is in part 2, the chapter 9, titled Etihons, where Nikolai admits to taking sexual advantage of an 11-year-old girl, raping her, and after it, not stopping her from committing suicide. The chapter also shows how religion kills victims and innocent. The young girl keeps saying to herself that she killed God, and that's what drove her to taking her own life. I don't think Nikolai is that crucial to the plot, but he is an example of somebody who seems perverted, demonic, which is the result of his confusion, not possessed by any ideology, he is too self-centered for it, but this created a moral void inside of him, and it allowed what we can consider demonic forces to move in. Interestingly, he is a product of Stepan, who was his tutor in his childhood. He might be an example of somebody using being exposed to bad ideals as an excuse for not having any ideals. Pyotr, Stepan's son, sees Nikolai as a symbol of a recruit, morally confused, so his soul is out for grabs, a potential member. Stavrogin, you are beautiful, cried Pyotr Stepanovich almost ecstatically. Do you know that you are beautiful? What's the most precious thing about you is that you sometimes don't know it. Oh, I've studied you. I often watch you on the sly. There is a lot of simple-heartedness and naivete about you still. Do you know that? There still is. There is. You must be suffering and suffering. But Nikolai is too self-absorbed to be interested, to see it as a way out, and that seems to be his undoing. He came to the point where he can no longer separate himself from his actions, and the duel he has been challenged to seems a breaking point for him. He seems to realize he cannot behave the way he used to. He tells one of the women who is in love with him that he might ruin her. Unfortunately, he seems to arrive at the conclusion that there is no salvation after repentance. That's why the chapter Etihons, skipped in older publications, is important to understand Nikolai, his struggle. The violation of the young girl is something unforgivable. Maybe Dostoevsky was trying to make a point that some sins cannot be self-forgiven and escaped from. A similar point is made in the Brothers Karamazov in the story about a doctor who murdered a woman and got away with it. Okay, that's it for part 1. I will describe the other characters in the second part. Until then, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.